Coming to you from Studio A here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, it's only natural that we chat today on the Gardening Simplified Show with Stacy Hervella, me, Rick Weist, and our engineer and producer, Adriana Robinson. Okay, Stacy, should you only plant native plants? Maybe today's going to be a little bit of a controversial show. We haven't had this much controversy since we tried to define the color blue. So let's have at it here and talk about native plants.
Well, I think you've really gotten us off on a controversial start by saying, should you only plant native plants? Exactly. Because that is an extreme way to start this discussion.
It's an extreme way. And here's why I said that and phrased it that way. Working in the garden center and in the greenhouse, I would have people who would come walk in and say, where are the native plants? And I'm only going to plant native plants. And I'll ask them, why? And they can't really answer me. And it's a real struggle for me. As a matter of fact, here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, Tim Wood says we live in the golden age of plant breeding.
That's true.
And it's true. He's right. Exactly. And so I think about these things. I think about like someone like Henry Ford, when he invented mass production in the vehicle. And it is said that he was quoted as saying that, did you consult with people on this? And he said, no, if I asked people what they wanted, they just would have asked for faster horses. Now, it's arguable whether or not he ever said that. But one thing he did say, and that is if you want your car in a certain color, it's all good as long as you get it in black, right?
Yes, famously that he did say.
Famously, he did say that. So we live in this golden age. And then, in American history, I think of somebody like Lady Bird Johnson, the first lady and wife of Lyndon Baines Johnson, and a person who's totally into native plants. And when she was asked why she had so much interest in wildflowers and native plants, she said, well, this is such an amazing, wonderful country. And if I'm going to be in Texas, I want it to look like Texas. If I'm going to be in Vermont, I want it to look like Vermont. So, native plants is a fascinating subject.
And, I'm glad that you brought up Lady Bird Johnson, because the Lady Bird Johnson Wildflower Center is in Austin and is a marvelous, I have not been fortunate enough to visit it, but marvelous place to learn more about Texas native plants. But their website, wildflower.org, is one of my absolute hands-down favorite resources for native plants on the entire internet. So when I'm looking, when I'm trying to help, when I'm researching the show, when I'm trying to help people garden, it's one of my go-to spots to learn about where plants are native to, what benefit they have to wildlife, and I find it to be just an invaluable resource.
Yeah, I agree. It's an amazing thing. So talking to Kevin Hurd yesterday at Proven Winners, Kevin said to me, I like to use native plants because of their adaptability. And that doesn't mean that non-natives aren't adaptable. It limits your garden palette if you were to only plant natives. In other words, I'll come right out and say that I am in the camp, and with my landscape also what I practice is I practice planting both natives and non-natives. And I think as long as you're attuned to which plants are invasive or could potentially be invasive and not plant those, not distribute those, then I think that the native plants and non-natives can coexist.
Yeah, they absolutely can. And I think that you make a really good point, and that a lot of people who are very vocal about native plants do treat it like it's an all or nothing issue. Mm-hmm. You either have to be a completely native plant gardener or you shouldn't garden at all. And I think that is, there's no benefit in having such a hard line stance. And I think, for myself, I do garden with a lot of native plants. I value gardening native plants, and I will tell you why. Because I love bugs. Yeah. And I specifically choose native plants because what I want out of my garden is to see a variety of insects. I want to watch the interaction of the plants, of the insects, of the birds. And that's where the value and the joy in the garden is for me. But I think everyone kind of needs to come up with their own reason for it, and then that will inform it. And I think that, sometimes limiting your plant palette can actually be a valid reason. Sure. I know that people get very confused when they go to a garden center and there's, thousands of different plants, and you may walk in and say, where are the native plants? This is how I am choosing to narrow down these endless options that otherwise I'll walk out of here empty-handed because I don't know what to buy. So there's a lot of different reasons, but I don't think that it has to be extreme. And I also think that people might have a journey similar to mine, whereas once I started growing native plants and I really enjoyed their aesthetic contribution, I really enjoyed the insects and everything that they brought in, then I wanted more, and I did get to more. But it doesn't have to be like, okay, right now rip out your entire yard and transition everything over to native plants and then, pat yourself on the back and sit down for the next 20 years. It's not going to work that way.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I have a number of native plants in my landscape, but that's the point I'm trying to make, is that I'm not going to go to an extreme as I view it and plant all of just one thing. I think that they can coexist. I benefit from it. I think of plants, Stacy, like basil or Hacanacloa or hellebores or the red hot pokers that are in my yard, or even my beloved cannas, right? If I decided, well, I'm only going to plant native, I wouldn't be enjoying those plants in my yard.
And, you garden for enjoyment. You garden for the color. And I think that's really what is the bottom line here, is whatever your gardening decisions are, is like searching out the root of that and then using that to make your decisions. And, again, realizing it doesn't have to be an all or nothing kind of thing. And I think especially when it comes down to native plants, you start to get into a, issue of like, well, how native is native?
Right.
Is it just native to my county? Is it native to my city? Is it native to my state? Is it native to my region? And those are not questions that we can answer for anybody. If you are on that native plant journey, those are questions you have to answer for yourself. What is native enough for you?
True. And of course, North America is a big place.
It's pretty huge.
And so if you are going down the road of native plants, consult the USDA hardiness zone map when you're putting plants in the ground. I think about something like lavender, native to Mediterranean regions, then moves to Europe, then comes to the States. I love lavender. I want lavender in my landscape. So just an interesting, somewhat controversial subject. And some people will argue that, well, native plants are lower maintenance than non-native plants.
Well, I think that also gets at another issue with the native
same reaction.
with the native plant issue, is that people just they characterize it with these really broad strokes that really don't do any aspect of the issue justice. And lower maintenance is certainly one of them. Yeah, there are absolutely grasses that I can grow in my West Michigan garden and will be very low maintenance. But, if I grow panicum, a native panicum, it's not actually any lower maintenance than a miscanthus, because they both are going to be cut back in spring. They're both going to form big clumps, all of this. And it's still going to be an issue of the right plant in the right place. I could go up to Muskegon State Park, and no one should do this, but say I wanted to, in the spring, there's some very interesting carnivorous plants that grow along the shores there. Yes. And that's a native plant. But I cannot take that from Muskegon State Park and plop it into my very sandy, very sunny garden and expect it to be a low maintenance plant. If I wanted that to stay alive, it would be extremely high maintenance. So it's always a question of, just like anything else in gardening, it's the right plant for the right place. And again, going back to that motivation, why this plant? Why is this resonating for you?
Yeah, exactly. And so then you have a person like me who begins to struggle because I'm a plant hoarder. And many of us become plant hoarders. So I have a limerick for you on this subject. Before I give you the limerick, let me say this, though, Stacy, because you made an important point here earlier in this segment, and that is my experience has been both native and non-native plants do a great job in attracting pollinators.
Yes, they can. I mean, the insects and pollinators don't actually necessarily know what's native and what isn't.
Right.
They just know it's yummy.
Yeah, exactly. They know it's yummy. So here's my limerick. I really want to be accommodative. What's original? What's imitative? Which of these plants got here first? Via seeds, birds inadvertently dispersed. I'm trying to be natural and native. Priority in a pecking order. I have impulsive plant buying disorder. A circle has no beginning. The thought has one's head spinning for this perpetual plant hoarder.
Oh,
That's me.
That was fantastic.
Well, thank you.
It was some of your finest limericking.
Oh, well, thank you very much. I appreciate that. This is just a topic that I'm passionate about, and I think I'd like to talk about it in future weeks because there is so much talk about native plants. I love native plants. Native plants are so important, but there's an opportunity here to use both, and that's how I feel.
Yeah.
So send us your notes, your cards, your letters. Plants on Trial is coming up next here on the Gardening Simplified Show.
Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. It's time for Plants on Trial, and as I always say, I try to tie it in to the topic of the day, which today is native plants, one of our more controversial topics, but as always, I hope that it comes across that, what I personally firmly believe is that gardening is for everybody, and we can make our decisions about how we garden and what we plant. And as long as we're coming from a point of educated, reasoning towards that, then, everything is potentially valid. It's all a journey, and we can all be on different points in that journey. And some of us might be on a native plant path, and some of us might not be. And, it's just a matter, gardening is a lifelong learning adventure. So.
It is, and it's better when we apply common sense. Also, it's always important to apply common sense. And so you try to wrestle with these issues. And like I said, Stacy, we'll continue to talk about this.
We definitely will. And because we are tying Plants on Trial into today's topic, it might not come as a surprise that it is what is known in some circles as a nativar. Now, I will tell you right now, I do not like this word nativar. No, this isn't going to turn into a Dr. Seuss inspired limerick. I do not like this word nativar. Number one, because it's a portmanteau. So if you heard this term, a portmanteau is like when a word is made up of two different words. So you've substituted something in, swap something in for the other word. So in this case, it would be cultivar, and then they swapped native or native is culta, and so they call it a nativar. So it's a cultivar that's native, but a portmanteau should work where the words are essentially equal, and in this case, that is not the case. So I don't like the word from a linguistic standpoint, but also
I've been portmanteauing for years, and I just didn't know I was doing it.
Well, now you've got a word for it.
Thank you, Stacy.
And because most of the time when people talk about nativars, they are using it as a insult. So a nativar, again, is just a cultivar or a cultivated variety. So a selection that someone has come along and said, oh, hey, this is pretty swell. It's a little bit different than the other, individuals in this population. And so I am going to take it and I'm going to disseminate it and I'm going to call it, Rick's Pick or whatever. So that would be a nativar, a selection of a native variety. And a lot of people say, oh, nativars, they're not environmentally valuable. They're not good plants. And it's a much more nuanced situation than that, because really, if you are not growing nativars, then your only true alternative is essentially to go out into the woods and dig stuff up and put it in your yard. And you should not do that, because first of all, you'd probably be on property where that is not permitted.
And get you arrested.
Could get you arrested. And second of all, then you are disturbing a natural ecosystem to put it into your artificial ecosystem in your backyard. And that's not cool. That's not a good thing at all. So, nativars, again, a lot of people have a bad reputation. They mean something bad to people, but really all it means is a selection of a native plant. And there can be a lot of different reasons that a native plant was selected to become a cultivar or nativar. Okay. So I think one of the earliest ones that kind of really set this nativar conversation in a bad direction was double echinacea. Oh. So echinacea was, on the scene. People were loving it. It's super duper popular. And of course, plant breeders are like, hey, people love echinacea. What's next for echinacea? And they came up with these double echinacea. So echinacea, of course, are cone flowers. And they have, petals, a big cone in the center, and then petals that go down. And then the double echinaceas have a second set of petals on top, like a little crown. And so people said, well, pollinators aren't going to recognize these, and these are really bad for pollinators, because now instead of planting echinacea that are beneficial to pollinators, people are now planting these double echinacea and they aren't as beneficial for pollinators, and that is a bad thing. But a nativar isn't simply its flowers. It's not simply like, oh, well, this is a double flower or this is a different color flower. And a lot of the nativars that we develop here at Proven Winners Color Choice Shrubs, one of our main goals is actually changing the size of native shrubs so that they are more useful and more easily incorporated into residential landscapes.
Sure.
And that's a really important thing, because in this case, we're not talking about, hey, we've fundamentally changed something so it's no longer beneficial to pollinators or wildlife. You wouldn't have probably been able to plant a lot of our nativars because they were 10 feet tall and wide, and you don't have space for that in your backyard. So it can mean a lot of different things. And we have probably about a full third of the shrubs in the Proven Winners line are selections of our native species that we have collected over the years, that we have selected through selective breeding. And the one that I'm talking about today, it took a long time for me to get to today's plant on trial.
It's interesting.
Is Scape Snowfire aronia. And the reason that I picked Scape Snowfire is because it has more of everything that's good for wildlife. So one of the reasons that this particular aronia, also known as chokeberry, was selected is because it is an extremely heavy flowering variety. So what makes it different from our native aronias is that it has probably 2 or 3 times the amount of flowers on it. So that means a lot more nectar for pollinators. The flowers are just like the native, species. So a lot more nectar for pollinators when it's flowering in spring. And then all those flowers turn into fruit for birds in fall. So then you have 2 or 3 times the amount of fruit for birds. So it's really just a different way of looking at what is the characteristic that any given plant breeder is trying to bring out of the plant, and how does that, when it comes to native plants, affect the reason that you're growing it in the first place, which of course, in my case, is insects. So aronia is one of those native plants. We talked a little bit about native to where in the first segment. And aronia is one of those plants that's native to a huge portion of the United States and Canada. In fact, if you look at a map, basically everything east of the Mississippi, aside from Florida and Louisiana, you will find aronia growing wild. So hugely adaptable, hardy USDA zones 3 through 9. You'll find it all the way in the north of Quebec, all the way down to the southern part of Georgia. So if you are anywhere within this huge range of states, it is native for you.
Birds and animals have done a good job spreading the love, right?
Because of those, we call them chokeberries because the fruit, it will not make you choke, but it has a strong astringency that will suck all the moisture out of your mouth. If you've ever put alum in your mouth, it's that kind of thing. It just makes you pucker up. But the birds love it, and so do other animals, and therefore aronia has made its way and is considered native to, again, about half of the U.S.
I'm going to try some in my morning smoothie sometime.
Oh, okay. Let us know how that goes.
Probably won't go too well.
Well, you probably will not want to load up on the aronia. It's very healthy. It has huge amounts of vitamins.
I can imagine.
But the flavor is definitely better for the birds than for your average human.
But Stacy, the benefit of the plant also and the cultivar to us, to people, aside from pollinators and animals, in our landscapes. A few weeks ago, I took pictures of aronia in fall color.
Oh, yeah.
It is knock your socks off.
Yes, and Snowfire, that's where the fire part of Snowfire's name comes from, is because it has incredible fall color. I mean, all aronias have good fall color, but...
And so if you planted an aronia in your landscape, you would never plant a burning bush again, which is considered invasive in some states.
Yeah.
Just knock your socks off.
Right. So it kind of really shows how there's just so much nuance into this conversation. But Scape aronia is also very, very easy to grow, very adaptable. We talked about adaptable. Native does not necessarily automatically mean adaptable, but in many cases, and certainly in the case of aronia, it does. This is a plant that can tolerate pretty much any kind of soil, wet, dry, not a problem. pH prefers acidic, but not going to be too finicky about it. You got road salt, no problem. You got clay, no problem. You got sand, no problem. It really, there's few, if any, challenges, except deer, of course. Now, the deer, I have grown aronia in my deer-ridden yard, and they eat the flowers, which is kind of a bummer.
I moved mine in the compound.
Yours is now in the compound, yeah. So it's in the rose family. So many members of the rose family are relished by deer. But it's a really beautiful plant. And again, it has benefits to humans and it has benefits to animals. And I think it's just a great example of how plant breeding a nativar, selecting for a nativar, doesn't necessarily mean it's taking something away from nature. It can actually, I don't want to say improving it because that's not the goal, but it can actually do more in your yard for you and for animals. So if you want to see pictures of Scape Snowfire aronia, which of course you do, it's a fabulous little plant. It's 3 to 4 feet tall and wide, so very useful in the landscape. You can go to gardeningsimplifiedonair.com. You'll see our pictures there. Of course, it'll be on our Instagram. And if you watch us on YouTube, you'll see Adriana's fabulous photographs of Scape Snowfire in our trial gardens. We're going to take a little bit of a break. When we come back, we're opening up that gardening mailbag, so stay tuned. Greetings, gardening friends, and welcome back to the Gardening Simplified Show. One of the ways that we like to simplify gardening for you is by answering your gardening questions. Now, I have to say it's early November, and it seems to me as though the garden questions are on the Proven Winners side, people writing to us, starting to dry up. I think people are feeling like, hey, the garden is mostly put to bed, but we still have lots of questions in the inbox. And I tried to pick questions today that would really speak to some concerns that people have now and over the coming weeks, because I know there's still a lot of confusion about, hey, it's November, can I do this, shouldn't I do this, blah, blah, blah. So without further ado, what do we got in the mailbag, Rick?
All right, let's do it. Kathy is asking us this week, I want to paint the town dianthus in a shallow garden bed. How deep do the roots go on these plants when fully mature, so that I ensure they have enough soil real estate for their root systems? Your help is much appreciated.
So this is a question we get a lot. And I think because nobody, you don't see the roots very much. And so they're kind of a mystery to people. But the bottom line here is that roots generally do not go as deep as most people think.
Correct.
And so usually you can guess about 1.5 times the height. So paint the town dianthus is a pretty short little perennial. I wouldn't count the flower stalks in this height. So the little clump of foliage is probably, about 5 to 8 inches or something like that.
6 inches tall, yeah.
So they go about that deep and about 1.5 times the width of the plant outward. But, I think one of the things that really surprises people when they find out is that plant roots don't necessarily go very deep because there's no oxygen down there. And plant roots need oxygen just like anything else. This is why you can kill a plant so easily through overwatering it, because that replaces all of the oxygen in the soil pores with water, and the plants literally can't breathe and they suffocate. So oxygen is super crucial for healthy root growth. And if you get much further down than about 18 inches, you're starting to have very, very little oxygen for the roots. Now, some plants do have certain adaptations where they can grow. But I think we've said this on the show before, if you're walking in the woods and you see a tree that is tipped over from a storm, you might be surprised to see that those roots that are torn up, they weren't 6 feet down in the ground.
You're right on with that, Stacy. And aside from the oxygen, also roots compete for moisture and nutrients. They do that by working their way up to the surface. I would say with this plant, paint the town dianthus, which is a gorgeous perennial. I love this plant. Good drainage. Just make sure we have good drainage. Because if you don't have good drainage, that's how we're going to lose this plant. As a matter of fact, years ago when we were planting pinks or dianthus in the landscape, they would melt out in summer due to heat. And this is one of these plants that was bred and developed for heat tolerance. So I would just make sure good drainage.
Yes, that's true. And I do want to talk quickly about the roots, but I want to share a fun fact. When you said pinks, so, dianthus or pinks have been around for centuries. Very, very popular garden plant. And the term pinking shears for those who sew, they're special scissors that you use that make a little zigzag edge, actually comes from dianthus because the edges have that little serrated kind of zigzaggy edge.
How do you know this stuff?
Well, I recently did a bunch of research on dianthus, and that was one of the many interesting things that I found out.
It's a pinking scissors?
Pinking shears.
Pinking shears.
Yes, so that name comes directly from Pink's dianthus.
I'm just working on the list here. Nativar, pedantic, blammo, pinking.
Portmanteau.
All these.
Don't forget portmanteau.
Oh, portmanteau. I've been doing it for years, just didn't know it.
But Kathy, another thing I want to say is that when it comes to roots, a lot of plants can actually deal with more restricted root room than you might think. They are just going to respond by being smaller. So you can think of something like a bonsai tree. You know, in nature, those trees would be 40, 50, 80 feet tall. But if you take it and you grow it in a tiny little container and you restrict its roots, it's going to respond in kind by staying small. So you don't necessarily need to have this idea of optimal, root real estate if you are willing to say, hey, I don't mind if this thing stays a little bit smaller. But Rick, You're absolutely right. Good drainage is key for dianthus. So Kathy, I think that it sounds like your plan for Paint the Town dianthus is going to work out just fine.
Dana's wondering, I purchased 10 quarts of maiden grass. Now that would be miscanthus,
correct,
right?
Yep.
Okay, miscanthus to miscanthus. She won the Miss America contest. Was it last year? No. Miscanthus, a plant. It's a beauty. It's a grass. To plant at a property in Lake County. I've had them a week and put them in my greenhouse thinking I will plant them in spring. Should I plant them now? Temperatures are falling into the 20s next week. I'm concerned these small quart containers wouldn't do well over winter.
So, again, it's early November here and people are definitely starting to wonder, should I still plant? The bargains are still out there. They can't resist scooping them up. Is it still okay to plant? And the general guideline that I always give people is that you want to try to have your plants in at least 6 weeks before the ground freezes. So it really doesn't matter what kind of frosts we've had. You're looking for that date when the ground actually freezes solid, because it's at that point that root growth is essentially going to stop because the ground is frozen. But the trick with that, of course, is that it's impossible to predict when the ground is going to freeze solid. I don't know that data is out there, and it changes so much these days from year to year. Sometimes the ground might be frozen and then it gets warm and then it's not frozen solid. So my general advice, especially for things that are very hardy and reliable, which would certainly be the case of miscanthus, it's best if you can to get them in the ground now than to try to overwinter them in containers, and certainly don't try to overwinter them indoors. So if it's a hardy plant, a durable plant like miscanthus is, again, as long as you're within roughly that 6 weeks before the ground freezes kind of time frame, I would say yes, go ahead and get it in the ground.
I agree 100%. I've been planting in November in Michigan for years with great success. Maybe mulch at the base, but I think you'll be good. And miscanthus or maiden grass is very tough. A plant native to Asia, but does really well in Michigan, northern states here in North America, and highly deer resistant.
Very deer resistant. Yeah, just an overall tough plant. But mulch, of course, is a good idea, because what mulch is going to do is prolong that period of optimal root growth. And that's key to getting your plant established and through winter.
What about your next question there, Stacy?
Oh, yeah. Okay. So in keeping with the theme of a controversial show, I decided to answer this question from a listener, Genevieve. She had very nice things to say. She says, I love to feed the birds, but the feral cat population in my neighborhood keeps increasing, and they hunker down in my yard by the bird feeders. I'm worrying that I'm luring the birds to their demise. Should I stop feeding the birds? What would you do?
That's tough.
It is really tough. And, I know there's so much love for cats out there. I also love cats.
Same
but
here.
I don't think that there is a scientist on Earth or a biologist or ecologist who would characterize outdoor cats as anything less than an ecological disaster. I looked up some data, found reliable sources. Outdoor cats are estimated to kill about 1 billion birds a year and 6 billion small mammals. Now, it's one thing if you have a cat, an indoor cat that goes outdoors. It's probably well fed. Its hunting instincts may or may not be the best. It's still not a good idea to let them outdoors. But when it comes to feral cats, you're definitely going to have cats that, whether or not someone in your neighborhood is feeding them, they're just going to be much more attuned with that natural hunting instinct and therefore are going to, of course, kill birds. Now, I think if you're really concerned about it, I do think, as heartbreaking as it is, probably the safest thing to do is to stop feeding birds until the cats stop coming around. But I did find some interesting solutions out there that you might consider. And so I'm going to share those. So one of them is that you can use, first of all, position your feeders in the open. So they recommend 10 to 12 feet of open ground around your feeders. So no plants that far away from your house or any other structure, no furniture, no storage bins, any place where a cat could lurk and hide. Keep those feeders out in a good 12-foot radius of complete openness.
And that's what I do, but 10 to 15 feet away is really good cover afforded to the birds so that they can scoot back and forth. Yeah.
And thorny plants helps too.
Yes.
They really like to take shelter in thorny plants. So that's one thing that will help. Scent repellents will also work. So you can try sprinkling curry powder or cayenne pepper on the ground where the cats would walk to your bird feeder. Now, the dollar store is a great source for all those. You don't have to go broke buying them organic spice. Just go to the dollar store, get yourself a big container. And then there's a bunch of essential oils that can work and some different cleaners, especially those formulated with orange peel or orange oil that can also function as a scent repellent. And then finally, there's something known as scat mats.
Yes.
And they can be made out of metal, they can be made out of rubber, they can be made out of plastic, and they're basically just something that's super uncomfortable for the cat to walk on. And you would have to combine that perhaps with some other strategies, but the cats won't walk on it. Just do bear in mind, of course, the cats can make some pretty impressive leaps, especially if they are food motivated. So make sure that you're following all of these other recommendations.
Familiarize yourself with organizations in your community that deal with this also. They have ideas. There are great people out there who rescue cats,
Yep.
who take care of cats. There's some amazing people and organizations out there. Familiarize yourself with these people.
That's some great advice. We're going to take a little break. When we come back, we've got branching news, so please stay tuned.
It's time for branching news here on the Gardening Simplified show. Stacy, we talked about native plants earlier in this show. Of course, our attention and the attention of many people, there's many good people out there who are dealing with invasive plants and the invasive nature of some of these non-native plants that create a serious problem. And hydrilla is one of them. It's an aquatic plant and has been detected in our state where we're broadcasting from here in Michigan for the first time. A real concern.
Yeah, aquatic invasives are extremely problematic because not only are they difficult to manage, you can't use certain herbicides on them because of course they're going into the water, but they choke out waterways. They can completely change the biology of streams, ponds, rivers, lakes, etc. So they're really problematic, but sometimes they can actually turn into something good. I don't know if you're familiar with water hyacinth.
Yes.
It's a popular ornamental that people put in their ponds and dish gardens and that kind of thing. And it's not likely to be invasive here because it's very tropical, but in the tropical areas where water hyacinth is invasive, they actually harvest it and use it to make like a kind of fiber that they make into doormats.
Oh, wow.
So they've made something really good out of something really bad.
That's cool. Earlier we were talking about a non-native here in North America, but we use a lot of it, and that is miscanthus, maiden grass, and they would weave the grasses to make thatched roofs and make something good out of it. So there you go. Hydrilla. So very concerning. Outcompetes native plants and can quickly fill a lake or a pond. I hear hydrilla, it makes me think of Godzilla. You remember the Godzilla movies?
Yeah, of course.
I don't know how many remakes of Godzilla they did, and the Blue Oyster Cult did this great song called Godzilla. It's fabulous. Listen to it sometime. I'm going to have Adriana listen to it. Fun to listen to. Blue Oyster Cult Godzilla. So there you go. As a matter of fact, it was the walk-up music for the famous slugger Hideki Matsui.
Oh, yeah, that makes
from
sense.
the New York Yankees. Yeah.
Nice.
That's what they call them. Anyhow, why I went there, I have no idea. So let's go here. Here comes Thanksgiving. A survey of 2,000 Americans looked at their social calendars for the holidays and found the average person will attend 5 different gatherings this holiday season. So the top rules when you go to these homes are to clean up after yourselves, help clean up afterward, and to bring something to the gathering. Don't show up with nothing. 46% also expect others to take off their shoes before entering the house. 41% expect guests not to go into closed rooms without their permission.
Wait, who would do that? I mean, maybe if it's like close family, but
41%.
Wow, there are some bad guests out there. Yeesh.
My room isn't messy. I just have everything on display. It's like a museum. All right, check this out. Baskin-Robbins has just announced they'll be releasing a new ice cream flavor inspired by Thanksgiving dinner. This new flavor, released by Baskin-Robbins, will be the company's new flavor of the month that arrives just in time for Thanksgiving. The name of the flavor is Turkey Day Fixins, but won't actually contain any turkey flavors. Instead, you'll be able to sample honey cornbread, spiced sweet potato, and ocean spray cranberry all in one bite. And they're bringing back turkey cake.
That's a cake that looks like a turkey, not a turkey flavored cake, right?
I don't know. I want to try it.
I'm just gonna pretend that's the case because I don't.
You ain't seen stuffing yet. Much ado about stuffing. Well, anyhow, so when it comes to turkey, it's the best idea ever. It's a great flavor. Newsflash, viral sensation Claude the Leaf Thief koala bear now has a partner in crime. Have you seen this story?
Is this the koala bear that destroyed like $250,000 worth of seedlings in a nursery?
Yes.
I heard about that, yes.
Walks into a nursery. So this is in Australia. Eastern Forest Nursery near Lismore in the Northern Rivers region. And so they caught Claude, the koala bear, and Joey feasting on this all-you-can-eat buffet. They're eating for two. And so Claude has been caught on camera and has eaten all kinds of seedlings. It's cost them a lot of money, and of course, there's a lot of people working there in Australia trying to grow these eucalyptus seedlings so that they can grow more of them for the koala bears. But they figured out how to break in and feast in the nursery.
Can you imagine a koala bear as your garden pest? I mean, just
I can't imagine.
Imagine,
and they're so cute.
They're so cute, and this is a really good, interesting thing because, of course, eucalyptus is native to Australia. I saw some fabulous eucalyptus in Australia, but where it has been planted and it's not native, like in California, it's causing huge problems, contributing to wildfires, and has become invasive in some areas. So another good example of where a native plant is a good thing and where it might not be.
Well, this nursery obviously has cameras to catch Claude red-handed, and they are qualified to grow eucalyptus plants. Did you catch that?
I did,
Qualified?
Yeah. Yes.
After dinner, they had a peanut koala. Oh, this is so bad, I got to move on. To some, the sounds of cowbells are synonymous with the Swiss countryside. To others, they are a sleep disturbing nuisance. So there's a village in Switzerland where the regional government has become involved because the cattle are so noisy wearing these bells. The problem is you have some people who say, take the bells off the cows. This is ridiculous and I can't sleep at night. And other people saying, it's beautiful. It's wonderful. The cows have always had bells. Leave the bells on the cows. And now this whole thing has escalated to the point where there's thousands of signatures on a petition and it's going to go to a vote.
Wow. Well, speaking of controversial topics, have I given you my opinion on wind chimes lately? Again, something that some people think is the most beautiful sound ever. And some people like me sit there and say, I'm trying to sleep. Could the metal please stop clanking constantly all evening? So, it's a highly subjective topic.
Just made a note not to give you wind chimes for Christmas.
Please don't.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, yeah, fascinating. And I'm going to be interested to see how this the Swiss town is voting next month on whether or not to protect cow and church bells.
Oh.
Wow.
Well, how are they going to find the cows if they don't have bells on them? I thought that was why they wore the bells.
Right. Cows wear bells because their horns don't work. You walked right into that one, and I'm not going to milk it.
I've never heard that before. This is my first time hearing that joke.
I need more cowbell. The old SNL skit with Christopher Walken and Will Ferrell. That's got to be one of the best SNL skits ever.
Come in here for a second, please. That was going to be a great track. Guys, what's the deal?
Are you sure that was sounding okay?
I'll be honest, fellas, it was sounding great, but I could have used a little more cowbell.
I wanted to mention this to you, Stacy. Of course, we both love birds so much, and so does Adriana. And NPR did a story, and I found this fascinating. I'm going to follow this, where they're going to rename a lot of birds. Did you see that?
Yeah.
Like Anna's hummingbird will go away. They're going to take away human names, English human names, off of birds because it can be deemed offensive or exclusionary.
Yeah. And, it's really not that useful. So, I think it's a good thing they're giving new names out.
Interesting.
Of course, now when it comes to common names, there is no one authority. So it's a little bit tricky because with scientific names, there is an authority and everyone has to agree. But with common names, it's kind of like you can try, but some names are very, very entrenched in the human psyche, and it would be very difficult to unseat them.
Yeah, as I understand it, the scientific or botanical names or whatever you want it, the scientific names are going to remain the same.
Yes, of course.
Yes. But the common names may change. The project begins next year and initially focuses on 70 to 80 bird species that occur primarily in the United States and Canada. So take as an example Cooper's hawk. It would no longer be the Cooper's hawk. What they're going to name it, I don't know. And I would think that this is going to be kind of difficult to do.
It is, but if they were ever going to do it, the internet age is the best time to do it. You can communicate things a lot more quickly. I think it's a great example of when you know better, you do better.
Fascinating. I'm going to follow this, and that's why it needed to be in branching news. I mean, this is a slippery slope when you think about it. What's next? Woody Woodpecker, Scrooge McDuck, Foghorn Leghorn, Big Bird. They're going to rename Big Bird?
I don't even think Big Bird's his real name.
Tweety Bird? Daffy Duck? I don't know. Anyhow, it's time for us to wing out of here. Boy, this has been quite a show.
It has.
Make sure to join us again next week. Same channel, same place. Reminders, Stacy, Instagram, YouTube, our website.
GardeningSimplifiedOnAir.com.
Podcast. You can find us out there just about everywhere, so make sure to tune in and share it with friends and neighbors. A big thank you very much to Adriana Robinson, our engineer and producer, and thank you, Stacy.
And thank you, and thanks to all of you.